right, welcome everybody. Thanks for Tom McDonough being here and sharing this incredible story of this almost movie-like security breach. And Tom McDonough is one of our first members and founding member of Digital Maturity Group. And you're going to see during this interview how passionate he is about security and how this very event shaped his thinking to take this security as a priority for small businesses. Thanks for Tom being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Danish.
So first, Tom, why do you think this topic is important before we jump into the details?
It's important for everybody. We're in the IT services business, but everybody's impacted by security. And the same way you want to protect yourself at home, everybody has a responsibility to make sure they're protecting themselves at work and their company. And if you're in a position like I am as leadership, you have a responsibility to your clients, to your employees, to your partners. Make sure you're doing everything you can to avoid what happened in our situation.
But Tom, security breaches are happening with others all the time, right? It's in the movies only, and with big companies and government, right? It's not. Is it really affecting small businesses?
Everybody thinks it's going to happen to somebody else, so you never put yourself in this perspective that it's going to happen to you. But one night you're going to be coming home from dinner with your wife and one of your kids, and you're going to get a phone call, and like I did, and it's going to happen to you, and you don't, at the time you don't realize the impact that's going to have over a long period of time, months and months and months. But it can happen, and it doesn't take much.
Tom, my question here is that, you refer yourself as a leader and you are talking to leaders here, but isn't it really a technical IT related problem? So we are having managed service providers, we are having, great vendors and Google and everybody's here, and isn't it their problem?
Well, it's a responsibility, I think, of people that are in a technical role, but you're accountable as the leader of an organization for what goes on. So even though you may not be directly responsible for it, you need to understand what's happening. You need to know what your exposure is, and then you need to plan. I think that's the biggest thing, is that people just don't understand the planning. So when you watch, it's almost like an out-of-body experience, Danish. You sit there and you see things on TV and you see how they portray what happens when a situation starts to develop. And you think they're just making that up in a movie or a TV show, but it's reality, because we lived it. We experienced what it felt like, that kind of visceral feeling of you don't know what's happening. Something's happening and you're trying to stop it or trying to get control of it. And it just, you can't necessarily. So you need to have a plan. You need to avoid it, right? The first thing you want to do is you want to do everything you can to protect and avoid it. And then if it does happen, or when it happens, make sure you're ready to react to it. So as a leader in an organization, you need to make sure that your people are doing everything they can to protect what's important to you. And then you gotta make sure they understand that there's a lot more to it than just a piece of software or hiring a company to do an audit. It's a pervasive thing throughout the organization that you have to get your hands around, and not to be overly dramatic and try to make this, people, the sky is falling, because that's not the case. It varies the types of businesses you're in, right? We're in an IT services business where people are putting trust in us to take care of them. Okay. So we have it's different for us a little bit than it may be for somebody who's manufacturing some parts on a floor, or another company. But other companies, insurance companies, lawyers, doctors, you have a responsibility to your clients and to your vendors to make sure everything's, buttoned up and protected.
Tom, can you tell the story what happened a little bit, because I'm getting anxious here, because I know it was a big deal, but so what happened that day?
So what happened was, it was a night I was coming back from dinner, like I mentioned. I was with my wife and one of my youngest son, and we were coming home, and it was in the summer, and I got a phone call from my service manager that said we have an issue with a client, that a client noticed there was something going on in their server. So this happens a lot in our business. It's not that big of a deal. She kind of just gave me a briefing to alert me what was going on, and so they were taking a look at it. It's probably 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. About a half hour later, she called me back. She goes, "Hey, we're seeing something similar at another client. We can't tell if they're related. We're not 100% sure." So when she told me that it was something at two clients, separate clients of ours, I said, let's start checking. So we started looking at all of our clients. And then at about 10 o'clock, she called me and she said, we see it in more than just those two. So not to get into the exact details of how many clients we have or how many were infected, but it was a third of our client base. At that point, we saw something was going on. So now we knew we had a problem. Okay. So now, we have technical people that they love to be the hero. They want to show up and solve these problems for the client. And so getting people to jump in and get to work is not a problem. But when they jump in to get to work and they're trying to remediate something that they're struggling with a little bit, or it's causing them some, it should be working, it's not, things escalate. So that's what happened. We had a breach. Somehow our customers, we weren't sure, and we're still not sure to this day exactly how it happened, but a bunch of our clients were breached with a ransomware. So what that is it gets inside to your system, and just what it says, it holds your data ransom. So it encrypts it, launches a virus, and if you want your data back and you have no other way to get it, you have to pay this ransom to get that data back, or you have to go through the process of recovering it. So over that night and for the next probably 24 to 48 hours, with some help from some partners that we work with that were very instrumental, we were able to stop it, contain it, and then start to remediate it. And that remediation process literally took months and months and months of time to do for clients. And some clients, they didn't have adequate backups off-site. They couldn't get their data back, and they had to pay the ransom to get it. And when you pay it, you get it. But the impact on their business, the impact on our business, not only those clients, the other clients that weren't impacted, our partners, our employees, myself, it's hard to think back. It's not the greatest, this a benefit for me to talk about this, because we can help other people not get into this situation. But it's not the most pleasant thing to talk about necessarily.
Yeah, and honestly, Tom, it's a really high level of candor what you have and what you do here, because like you were the protector. You were assigned to protect other people's data, and that has happened. And think about these consequences, because you started sharing these consequences. I was thinking, yeah, just paying the ransomware, dang it, and then get back on track. But I hear between the lines that there are more to it. What type of consequences people don't consider, you haven't considered before?
Well, panic and the confusion that comes from it are a real thing. When they talk about these things, this stuff is a real situation. And so, internally you have this situation that's going on with your people. They're responding, but they're getting panicked, and there's confusion. And then once you get through that initial phase, then, internally people are going, what's going on? How is this going to impact our business? How is it going to impact me as an employee? Customers are calling. They want answers. We don't necessarily have answers. You think about the public relations component of this is, is this going to be something that is on the news that you're going to read about? I mean, we're a small local company, but that would be, we don't need our name and paper related to something like that. And then the fallout that you have, so those things everyone can imagine. Some of the things you can't imagine is you had a lot of your customers that weren't impacted, and they're wondering why business is interrupted. What's going on? Why can't I get a hold of anybody? Why did all of a sudden these projects that were on track aren't on track? Why can't I get callbacks? You guys were a great service company. You guys help me all the time. What's going on? And then what do you tell people? Right? Internally, people didn't know what to say when anybody asked them what was going on. So, for any business and any leader, being prepared to handle these things, to go through the exercise of this planning and this kind of testing and this process, it's invaluable. Just even if it's just a tabletop exercise with you sitting around for an hour and a half over pizza and beer on a Thursday afternoon to kind of spitball this thing and see what it would be. At least that's some preparation. We didn't really have that. We had to figure it out on the fly. We did a great job. We pulled it off, and now it put us in a position that we can really deliver this to clients and we can really help customers. But it was a devastating impact to our business that we're still recovering from financially. And then, employees, that it's, they're concerned for, did I do the right thing? How did this happen? There's a responsibility we have. If you work with us, you want to take care of people and you want to make sure that they're in good hands. So there's all that kind of components that mix into it. But that's kind of the initial summary.
Tom, I have a question to you because it's really getting clear that your company in that day was a really good quality, well prepared managed service provider who is actually taking care of the infrastructure of the business, which this industry started 15 years ago when the different computer components, networks get too much complexity. So you were the owner of this infrastructure, but the last couple of years, this whole security and internet connections and networks and many applications raised this whole security to a totally different level, where your clients might have had a false assumption that you are responsible for that. Correct. And you had a kind of focus that I'm not responsible for that type of things, because just to make sure these type of breaches are not really hard breaches. These are breach of somebody's password, clicking on a wrong email or things like that. Is that a fair assumption that something is missing here from small businesses so they are vulnerable?
Yeah. So if you think about it, our life has gotten, we are open. Look, you and I are sitting here in different countries chatting, okay, in different time zones, like we're literally sitting right next to each other, okay? You're in 4K, we're sitting here and we're going to be able to take this and people are going to have access to it wherever they are, at their office, on their phone, on their smart TV, whatever. So as we've exposed and opened all this stuff up and made our lives easier and easier to connect so that you can watch Netflix on everything, you don't have to redo your everything is connected, okay? Phone, I get up here, my messages travel with me on my phone. I can text, I can email. There's a price that you pay as you get more open and more connected with your vendors, your customers, your everybody. So as you do that, you're just it's exposure that we have. So we have to understand that there's an associated risk as all these benefits that we get, okay? But we have a responsibility to make sure that we're playing. We want to be playing offense and not defense in this situation. We want to be thinking about that and preparing ourselves, because something is going to happen. We don't want to be we don't want to be having to react. We want to be prepared for what these things are that are going to be out there. So every business, if you're plugged into the internet, if your cord goes into the wall, if you get an email or a text or you hold a phone, you have a security responsibility that you have to make sure that when something happens, you know what to do and you minimize what that impact's going to be. All of us do. And it's not that difficult to do that. It's simple things. It's really just paying attention and being, first identifying, defining what the risk is, and then putting the appropriate. So you hear the analogy, or you hear the comment some people will say, says, you don't build $100 fence for a $10 horse, right? So, you got to understand what you have and what you need to protect. And then you kind of put that process around. There's a lot of people that can help you with it. But from a leader's perspective, you just have to be asking questions. You got to make sure it's important. If it's important to you, it'll be important to your team.
Tom, like we are using Zoom as a software here, right, recording that. And I've been using Zoom for years and years, and I've been using that every day, all day, because we have just remote workforce. And when this COVID-19 hit and everybody started to get Zoom calls, the security and privacy concerns raised dramatically. And even I realized after using this very software for years that how much exposure I had. However, it wasn't apparent before that. It just get apparent because that was like not 20 million people using that instead of 200 million people using that. And that shocked me, that if I'm using systems or I'm using software components, which is not like hundreds and hundreds of millions of people, there's a chance I'm using something which can be breached, or somebody's listening here or something like that. So I think that's really an important part here, is that the security and privacy get to a very, very, very next level. So we shouldn't just trust our managed service providers, our IT people. We need to somehow put that to the next level. So it's going to the next question, Tom, that, what did you learn after this breach, after this fallout, after this month and years of, experience after? Like, what was the lesson here?
I'd say that there's a couple lessons that are here. I think the first one is we had a perception that we were prepared, but we weren't prepared. And I don't think we were prepared because we didn't have a plan. The plan we had, we always thought, all right, we'll be able to handle this. And we have. We've always been able to handle a situation with a client, one or two. But when you have so many at one time, it becomes, what do you do? This worst case scenario or this disaster recovery kind of planning. All right, we just didn't do it, right? We had to do it on the fly. So I'd say the first thing was we didn't have a plan. We underestimated the vulnerability that we had as a company and what we did. And so when you do that, you just, and that's difficult to do. It's easier for me now because I felt it. It's harder for me, and hopefully this will help somebody to realize themselves. They listen, don't do what I did. Don't get in the situation we were in. You can prepare yourself. You can have a plan. And then part of that plan, one of the big things that we struggled with that I never thought about was communication. How do you communicate internally to your people with what's going on? How do you communicate to your customers when this is going on? What do you say? What do you don't say? I didn't realize there were things called a breach coach when you call your insurance company and they get in your law firm if you have cyber insurance, how that works. So, lots of us Danish, if we're running a business, we go every year, we go through an annual renewal with your insurance. Lots of times they'll talk to you and say, hey, do you want cyber insurance, or we want to renew this? And they'll give you a form. And this form will have questions that it'll ask you. Just if you stopped and looked at that form that the insurance company gives you, and instead of just trying to fill it out as fast as you can to get the lowest price or give it to someone else, if you looked at the questions they ask and you honestly asked yourself, do we have this, or why, or what are these things they're asking for? If you just did that tomorrow, you'd be better off than 80% of the 90% of the companies out there. So there's things that you can do that don't involve working with a managed service provider or hiring an IT consultant or doing anything other than just asking your folks, hey, where are we with this? What are we doing? So, I think that's ultimately what we didn't, the main lesson that we learned. And then the other thing we learned is the impact is so significant to your business that you really need to be able to have a plan to recover both financially, operationally, because you don't realize, you don't necessarily plan for that rainy day. Maybe you plan for something happen gradually, but you don't plan for something happening kind of like that. So I guess, that would be the highlight of what I would say is that the main thing that we learned.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying, because somehow I feel that somebody is listening that have a trust on their IT people, have a trust on their managed service provider, that's a dual responsibility. It's a responsibility for the managed service provider to become a security expert as well. That's one thing, because what you said is like, yes, if breaches are happening, it's not happening for one client, it's going to happen with multiple clients, systems across, everything is connected, right? So even you can plan your stuff and communication for incidents with one client, but basically that can overlap with many of them, and that's magnifying the problem.
And it's no different because every business has customers. Okay.
Yes.
My customers are we're doing IT support, but your customers are doing whatever you're doing. The manufacturing person is making parts for his customers. The doctor has patients. The lawyer has his clients, right? These are all, you're a conduit to them in one capacity or another. You have vendor partners. You have all these. So everybody has a responsibility. So our job now is we provide IT services. We look at security now not as an addition, but as a base level, and what we expect and what we'll allow are much different today than they were then. But the biggest thing we try to do, and what I try to do, is educate. So when I sit with the owners of the organizations we do business with, I do a lot of what I'm doing right now. I tell them this story. I explain to them the situation. I say, hey, here's what happened. This is what we did to prepare ourselves and protect ourselves, and what we're doing now and what we didn't do. And you need to do similar things for your business. If you think about it, a common thing we'll hear is a customer's running this old piece of software. Oh, we need to run this we need to run this application. I understand it's not a supported operating system anymore, but we can't make the investment. We can't do this. Well, you have an exposure when you do something like that. There's a risk you're taking that you open up to. As long as you understand what that is and you're willing to take it, that's fine. But you can't bury your head in the sand and think that's not an issue, because it's an issue. Your employees, right, where they're working. Look at what we're going through right now, where everyone's working remote. There's another responsibility you have. Someone's using their home PC to connect to your corporate network. How are you doing? I understand that we spin these things up pretty quickly to get going, but you got to go through this. Okay, are we going to operate this way? No one's coming back to the office, or we're coming back in shifts. Okay, how are you going to do all this work? What do you need to do? But just just ask these questions, educate yourself to make sure you know what the risk is, what the exposure is. And then lots of times it's not expensive things that you need to do to protect yourself. It's just doing it.
Tom, you have a strategy for solving these problems, and you said to me, like, you have to do something today and you have to do something tomorrow to make sure you are preparing your company. So let's start with what a business owner should do today to start protecting the company and their little child, the company they created, which is depending many families on that and that sort of things.
So the first thing that we tell everybody is that you need to assess what you have. You need to understand where you are today, okay? Because you don't want someone like me coming in and saying, here's a proposal, here's a plan, do all this stuff. And if someone comes in and does that without asking you questions or going through a formalized vulnerability assessment, a security audit, some kind of baseline to tell you what your risk and your exposure, that's the number one thing you need to do, okay? And there's a benefit to doing that, not only to understand what you have, but it'll also help you in other aspects of your business. It'll help you from a cost perspective when you're looking at talking to your insurance company. It helps you work with your vendors, because if you're doing any, because you got to think there's so many layers down. Certain companies will require vendors 15 layers down from the one vendor they work with to do answer a security Q&A, because they understand how deep that exposure goes. So the first part is you got to assess, you got to know where you are. Once you understand where you are and what your exposure is, then you put a plan in place. And that plan is a combination of working with a partner. You hear these stories about, you hear the term, virus. There's the baseline, what you protect the PC and your server. You hear all the stuff that goes on in email. So the biggest we're all connected, right? Everyone's worried. You hear these horror stories about someone buying $5,000 worth of gift cards that the owner told them to buy, or someone gets their email spoofed and sends out wrong POs or remittance areas. So the email is a big one, but it's simple education and protection as well. Educate your users what to do, simple things. It's not expensive. What they're supposed to do with their email, what they're not supposed to do, and then what you put in system-wide. How do you protect what comes in fenced around? How do you get alerted to those things? What's the real exposure? What's the plan when something happens? But really, ultimately, you want to start with assess what you have, and then make sure what you think is being protected or what you think you have, you actually have. That's a big deal.
So basically, like what I can do today is to make sure I actually have an understanding of the risk I'm taking today.
Correct.
A question to you in that regard, like if I'm hiring a managed service provider, can I trust the managed service provider to do this security audit, or I need to look for somebody else with more background or more, authority on IT security, or I can trust my managed service provider?
I think that, yeah, that's a good question. And listen, you're asking and what we do as a managed service provider. Ultimately, our responsibility is to help our clients be successful. Okay. So everything we do is around that. The days of security being a component or a separate offering of that for our company, NSI, are over. That doesn't exist anymore in our world. It is all or nothing. And if a client we work with doesn't see it that way, then that's fine, but we don't want to take on that responsibility because they look at us to be the ones to help support them. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they have everything they need. Lots of times they don't know what's good for them. The same way we go to a doctor, we don't necessarily know what's good for us. They're going to tell us, right? They say, listen, Tom, you got to exercise more. You got to take your vitamins. You got to lose some weight. Okay, I get it. I need someone to tell me that. And then listen, the doctor can't do those things for me. We can do those things for our clients, right? We can exercise for them. We can help them lose weight. We can do all those things. But they have to ask. So I would say to companies out there, you need to ask your provider what they're doing for you. And I would say you want that integrated. You don't want to have a separate security provider if you don't have to. But if your provider isn't doing what you think needs to be done, and you'll be able to tell, you can ask a couple of questions. You can talk to your peers that are in your same business, how they do it, because it's all integrated now. There are people that specialize in security, and we partner with them, right? We have a company that we work with that we find it's much better to have them do the assessment piece. It's the fox guarding the hen house. We want to be proved. We want our customers to feel confident that we're doing everything we can for them. And listen, we're not perfect. No one's perfect. We're not going to have everything buttoned up, but it's good to have someone check your work, give us a plan. So we outsource that with the customer. It's an independent third party. They assess what's going on, and then the customer feels a little better about what they hear. And then we execute on what they tell us needs to be done. And that's it. We could spend hours talking about this. This is not very complicated. It's simple. You assess what's going on. You figure it out. You put a plan together. You work with your partner to prioritize what has to be done. You make sure it gets done. And then you just do that again. Like you should do it every year. You do it over and you keep working on it. You run your tools because things change in this business. You and I know that. Listen, the amount of time we've worked with together, all the things with changes we've seen over 3 or 4 years that we've known each other, it's, significant.
And Tom, okay, so we have today, we get the assessment, even get the third party involved to get everybody, comfortable. Then what is the plan for moving forward? What's the strategy to actually keep that level of?
So the strategy on that is that you want to understand what's going on. This isn't to set it and forget it and come back and your turkey's done in 3 hours. This is you set it, it gets run, and then you want to understand what's going on. You want to be testing your users, and you want to see the results of that testing. So anybody that's listening to this can go sign up for the security awareness training for get these emails sent, this testing, and on a monthly basis for literally dollars per user per month, you can test your employees to make sure they're not clicking on the wrong things. And then with your managed service provider, your IT department, whatever you're doing, you want to understand, what are you doing? What are we seeing? Give me a report on what was happening, what's protected. And then big thing that no one thinks about is just be current on everything. Okay. Be current on your, make sure you're running on the latest and the greatest. You don't get behind. Moving to the cloud helps you push off some of that security to somebody else. It pushes it off a layer, but you're still accountable for it. Okay. The responsibility doesn't completely go away because Microsoft's hosting your email. Your email's there. Everyone thinks, oh, it's backed up, it's fine. Yeah, it's backed up and it's fine. But if your user accidentally deletes something and they don't realize it for 67, 90, 180 days, it may not be there and they need to get back. So you still have a responsibility. But the security changes all the time. You want an expert set of eyes looking at what's coming in and out. If you can do that, okay, you want to be alerted. And then you want to know someone's there to remediate it. And then have a plan, right? Have a plan when the worst case could happen, or just have a sense of what you need to do and how that would work. And then we get into the insurance piece, which is everyone should consider having some kind of cyber insurance, some kind of ransomware policy, and then ask the right questions of your broker, get the right people in from the different companies that represent and ask them those questions, and just educate yourself, right? Over and over again. And it doesn't end in 6 months. It's different in 6 months. It's a new thing in 6 months. So it's constant.
That's Tom. First of all, thanks for sharing this really candor information, and I can believe your passion, like why you are so passionate about that part. If you have like 2 minutes, can you just wrap this whole thing up in the story, lesson learned, and what to do as a summary?
I think that the summary would be is that it's not someone else's problem. It's not going to happen to somebody else. It's going to and this happens more often than not. I can tell you this is an interesting fact in terms of it's a personal thing and people feel embarrassed. So in my industry, in the last 3 months, I've had 2 conversations with other people I know that are in the same business, that they had similar situations. Okay. And I reached out to each of them and I said, listen, let me help you. Let me talk to you about, have you done this? And there were a cursory email back and forth, and then they went quiet. They didn't want to talk about it. Right. And that's the wrong approach. You have to learn from these things to get better. And so take this opportunity, learn from what happened to us. I'd be happy to talk to anybody at any time about in more detail certain things about this that we didn't share here, but just understand it could happen to you and have a plan, right? Educate yourself, have a plan, and continue to ask your people what's going on, how we doing, and it's not complicated. It's just some education you have to do and understand it's going to happen. And if it does happen, most of the time, you can, there's simple things you can protect yourself against and be prepared for it. And that's it. It's not much more complicated than that.
Thank you very much for this interview, Tom. And for all the listeners, just you to know that Digital Maturity Group, with these awesome founding members, we created a benchmark, which is actually not just going through the risk part of digital maturity and digital transformation, but the people component, the strategic component, how you use information, how you implement applications. It gives you really a great understanding how you are in this digital transformation. And one big part of that is the security and the risk. So everybody, this is really a non-profit organization, and we gathered experts around the world to help you locally with that. We created a framework to make sure that's a unified experience and we are able to measure different verticals together. So check out the course to action here.
Valuable those discussions, Danish, right? That we've gone through that with a couple clients, and just the conversation, just the ability to sit across the table from the owner of an organization, the finance person, the CEO, and just the it's difficult. If there's 25 questions, it's difficult to get through 5 because the conversations start and the questions and the thought process, right? It just starts so it's a really, really valuable and, talk to, just to have that, spend the time. It's hard. The hard part is getting the time. If you can make the time, it's going to pay off for you down the road.
And that's why we creating the education for the advisors and the whole unique process to make sure that's easy to convey. Everybody has an advisor nearby, so they can sit down and chat. And that's really an important part to make small business owner aware that digital technologies can help actually get better client experience, can get better productivity of employees, or even just eliminate the unnecessary stress and frustration we all have because we are not automating things and our company is not moving forward sometimes. So Tom, again, thank you very much for your help and being so candid with your situation, and I think it's a very invaluable advice you gave us here, and thanks for that to share with us.
Thanks for having me, Danish.